Assalamu alaikum everyone. As you know, we are having a business studies class. So I am Muhammad Shehroz, and today we are going to see what is the formal and informal communication. So after it, we are going to discuss the barriers of the communication. So let's move towards the board so that we can have a better view on formal and informal communication. So today we are starting it with the forms of communication. The forms of communication. So we are having two different forms of communication. The very first one is the formal communication, and the second one is the informal communication. The informal communication. Okay, so we are going to analyze what is the difference between the formal communication as well as what is the difference between the informal communication. So when messages are sent through established channel using professional language, messages in a formal language, we can say that messages are sent through a established channel using professional language. So such communication is known as the formal communication. If I have written some letter to the other organization, so it is the formal communication. Yes, the letter between the organizations, the memos between the organization. So we can say that the formal communication is the official communication, yes. And if we talk about the informal communication, so in informal communication, when information is sent or received casually with the use of everyday language, when information is sent or received casually, okay, so such sort of communication is known as the informal communication. Yes, so we can say that the informal communication is free in all directions, okay. Then we are going to see the types of the formal communication. Yes, starting with the types of what, of the formal, and then we are going towards the types of the informal as well. So types of formal communication, or the very first type of the formal communication is that it could be in a vertical way. Yes, then the formal communication can be horizontal, yeah, and the formal communication can be diagonal or the crosswise. The formal communication can be diagonal or crosswise. So what is the difference between the vertical communication? The communication between the people in the organization at the different levels, like a senior manager communicate with the junior manager. This is known as the vertical communication. Yes, communication at different levels, usually from top to low, okay. In a vertical communication, the communication is usually made from the top to low or from the low towards the top. Okay, or we can say that it's usually the communication between the subordinates. The communication between the subordinates. In a horizontal communication, the communication is between at the same level, at the same level, like manager of HR department talks with the manager of the marketing department. They are having the same level, they are having the same scale. So such communication is known as the horizontal communication. Now we can say that communication between the peers. Communication between peers. Okay, and if we talk about the communication between if we talk about the diagonal or the crosswise communication, so this is a communication between the peoples working at two different levels. Communication of peoples at different level. Okay, so there is usually a misconception between the vertical and the diagonal. So vertical usually flow from the top towards the low, and a diagonal there is no set pattern of the communication between the peoples. Okay, and if we talk about the informal communication, so we are having the three different ways of the informal communication. So the first one is the single stream. Okay, then the cluster chain, and the gossip chain. So starting with the single stream, one person tells something to one and then it moves from the other person. Okay, in a cluster chain, a group of people usually involved doing such, and in a gossip chain, I have tell something to my one group and they then move on towards the other. So there are different ways through which we can communicate formally or informally. So our next topic for today is the barriers of communication. Barriers of communication. So in a simple word, we can say that when we are having a communication gap, or when we are having a poor quality, or when we are unable to convey a correct message to someone due to some reasons, such situation is known as the barrier of the communication. So usually there are four barriers, or there are four ways which a barrier of communication could be created. So the very first one is the sender oriented barrier. The sender oriented. Okay. The second one is the receiver oriented. Okay. The third one is the feedback or the medium oriented. We can feedback oriented, or and then we are having the last, which one is the medium oriented. The medium oriented. So we are having the four different ways to judge the barriers of the communication. Okay, so if we talk about, or if we start from the sender oriented barrier of the communication, so the poor attitude of the sender, okay, at some time creates the miscommunication. Poor body language of the sender creates a barrier of the communication. Then the message maybe sometime it is too long, which creates the sender oriented barrier of communication. Okay, sometimes we give out the unclear or ambiguous message, so such creates the sender oriented barrier of communication. And the last one is the language is too difficult. While communicating with the other people, you must have a knowledge about the understanding of the audience. If you use the too much jargons, too much a good vocabulary, so sometimes they might or it might affect the people they are sitting around. They are not able to understand the things clearly. So the language is difficult to understand is an other sender oriented barrier. Language is difficult. Okay. If we talk about the receiver oriented barriers of the communication, so the very first receiver oriented barrier of the communication is inattentive listening. I'm not listening to someone attentively, so it creates a barrier. So inattentive listening. Okay. The second receiver oriented barrier of communication is that resistance to change. I do not want to change myself. Okay. Resistance to change. Yes. Lack of trust. Sometimes the receiver do not trust the sender, so it creates the barrier of the barrier of communication. So lack of trust. Okay. Then at the fourth, it is that I do not want to listen someone, so does not listen as an other. I just want to do what I want to. I do not want to listen someone else. So this creates a barrier of communication. So does not listen to anyone. Okay. If we talk about the feedback oriented barriers of the communication, so the very first, I haven't given any feedback. Yes, so it creates the barrier of communication. Feedback not sent. Okay. Then I have given a feedback, but it is unclear, so it also creates the barrier of communication. Unclear feedback. At last, feedback not asked for. Not asked for feedback. So in such cases, it creates the barrier of communication. For instance, I just have to send you the worksheets, and you do not supposed to return it back. So you are not going to solve it. So it creates the barrier of the communication between the peoples. Okay, medium oriented barrier of the communication. So the very first one is too many people pass on a message. One email, if I have sent to many people, it sometimes creates a collapse in the server, and it is known as the medium oriented barrier of the communication. So the very first is too many people to pass message. Then the other barrier of the communication is the message may be lost. I have lost the message. Okay, message may be lost. wrong choice of channel. Wrong choice of channel. Sometime I have chosen a wrong channel for communicating with the other people. It might create the barrier of the communication. And then last one is the technical breakdown. Nowadays we are moving towards the online classes, and I am giving you online classes. The internet is not working properly, so I cannot communicate properly with you. So technical breakdown. Technical breakdown.